Okay.
Good evening. My name is David Schwartz, president of the Men's Club. Helping me on the executive are John Silver and Constantine Kleiner. I have a special relationship with Rabbi Dan. I was Temple Sholom president when he was hired in 2013 and signed his employment agreement on behalf of Temple. Just applaud if you think that was a good decision.
Wait, some of them didn't clap.
He officiated at his first wedding for a Temple member for my daughter Kyla and son-in-law Jesse, who was in attendance tonight. The world changed for the Jewish world on October 7th. Quoting Charles Dickens from A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. Rabbi Dan, we look forward to your thoughts on the post-October 7 world and where we are today. Rabbi Dan's told me he will take questions, but let's save them to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I was going to try to say something funny. You're always supposed to say something funny after somebody introduces you, but I don't think I have anything. But it's great to see everyone, and I do want to thank David and this incredible congregation, because part of the post-October 7 world is a sense of loneliness and isolation as a Jew, and also a tremendous need for community and the strength that we get from each other. And I have felt certainly the loneliness and isolation, but never here, and always the sense of community and camaraderie and fellowship that we have in this congregation, and with Ezra sitting right in the front row, in our broader community as well. So, so many of you said, "Oh, I'm looking forward to your talk tonight." I was like, "Oh, I should probably make some notes." So when I came up with this topic, I thought, well, it'll become self-evident. You know, I think David asked for the topic, I don't know, 3-4 months ago. I'll know what to say then, and I'm not sure I even do now. But I've sort of framed it as good news, bad news. And I thought I would share with you some reflections on those two things, and then we can just have a conversation about your experiences and maybe to some extent my experiences. I want to acknowledge Rabbi Bregman is here as well, our Rabbi Emeritus. So let's do the bad news first, and then we'll do the good news, because I think the bad news we actually are all quite familiar with because we've been living it. And it's the one that either, overwhelms our social media feeds, or the ones that we are drawn to when we're watching news or listening to news or having conversations with others. So we know that anti-Semitism in Canada post-October 7th has been surging. For instance, Montreal witnessed a 670% increase in such incidents, with Jewish schools being targeted, universities. We know what's happened here in Vancouver, and we've had a relatively lighter experience than our neighbors to the east. I would say, but not lighter than our neighbors, or I would say, not lighter than our neighbors to the south. I think that many of us would consider the things that we've been encountering here in Canada to be at a different level than what we see, maybe aside from university campuses, which maybe we're on par with, but in the streets of American cities, they're not seeing what we're seeing in the streets of Toronto and Montreal, though we haven't really seen that too much here in our streets. Prior to October 7th, as you remember back, and I joke sometimes, does anybody remember the high holiday sermon I gave in September of 2023? The AI one, yes. Most people don't know the answer to that question. I didn't know the answer to that question for a long time because the entire world changed 2 weeks later. But prior to October 7th, there were deep divisions in the Jewish community, not just over the Israel, gently called the judicial reform, which was very much a division that we were seeing in Israel and starting to make its way here into our own community in Vancouver. You remember we had some competing protests. We had the unacceptable group here. We had people that protested, that said it was unacceptable for us to have the unacceptable group here. There were people marching outside of the Jewish Federation. and downtown about judicial reform half a world away. But we also had within our Jewish communities the continuing default line or fault lines between religious and, or I would say ultra-religious, I don't want to say orthodox, but ultra-religious and more secular or progressive. We always have had debates about what constitutes authentic Judaism. We continue to have debates about inclusion, particularly in sort of new inclusive spaces, or relatively new in terms of LGBTQ plus and various other identities that are tangentially connected to those identities. So it wasn't that there was everything was kumbaya and we were all getting along really well. But there were things that we agreed on. Though interestingly enough, so many of those things were actually, I would say, positive negatives. So the Pew Research Center, and this is an American study, but I think it's relevant to us, although generally the numbers are a little more positive when you compare Pew numbers in the United States to what would be, I think, survey results in Canada. But 76% of the American Jewish community in 2020, when the last survey was done, agreed that remembering the Holocaust was essential to Jewish identity. 75% believed that anti-Semitism was increasing. So even though we disagreed about all sorts of things, God, Torah, Israel, we agreed that they hated us then and they hate us now, and that unified us. That's a theme that's going to come back when we talk about the good stuff too. So we saw deep divisions between liberal and religious Jews, diaspora and Israeli communities and perspectives, generational gaps too, but generational gaps. I gave sermons about this. You've had these conversations with your university-age children or grandchildren who see their Jewish identity quite different probably than what you grew up with. We started to see then, we've seen it much more now, that to be a Zionist and a Jew, many of that generation saw those as two completely separate things. You could take one and leave the other. And my generation going forward saw them as inseparable. And so we saw that division developing certainly pre-October 7, and we've seen that since, of course. Political affiliations. It used to be that American Jews voted Democratic 85+% or more. But then we started to see a divergence there in sort of right-wing conservative politics, an alignment with the policies of the right-wing Israeli government, and that being associated with the political right in the United States. Trumpism had its, and still does, had an affinity amongst Jews that Jews had not really had before. Within the Republican Party, we're seeing embers of that here in Canadian politics as well with the conservative movement. We heard Paul Yabby speak there in our congregation, in our community. And so that divide from traditional democratic sort of social justice values and the more right-wing politics where Israel becomes, I'll say, a wedge issue. And so that started to divide our community. But then October 7th happened. And beyond the existential threat to Israel and the horrors of that day and the 500+ days that followed, the attacks revealed deeply disturbing anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiments amongst groups that on October 6th we thought were our friends and allies. And you've heard me share this story. I wrote about it in the Vancouver Sun, that I'm part of a multi-faith council of about 60 clergy people. I've stood with them, both in writing but very much in the streets on issues of immigration. We had a rally down at Jack Bull Plaza back during the first Trump administration. We've stood together on climate. We've stood together outside of well, not so much outside of our place of worship, although a little bit after Pittsburgh, but after the shooting at the mosque in Quebec City and in other places, we've stood together for things. And so I wrote to all of them on October 8th, and I said, our community's hurting. I could really use your support and for you to stand with us, and we're going to have a rally in 2 days. Will you come out? And as you heard me say, I got 3 responses out of 60 emails that I sent, and only one was allowed to be public, and that was very much to his credit, Archbishop Miller from the Catholic Archdiocese, who not only said I could share it, but then wrote an article about it and why it was so important. But it was like turning on the light and watching the mice or whatever scatter. when that came around. And it wasn't even that Israel was responding militarily yet. We were still engaged, attacked. There were still terrorists in Israel, and we were still identifying and burying our dead. In April 2024, 6 months after October 7th, Franklin Foer wrote a piece for The Atlantic titled "The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending." Can you read that? This to me was this was a significant article because I grew up in the golden age of American Judaism. I grew up in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, and I remember when I was going to university, I was wearing a yarmulke all the time. And my papa, my grandfather on my mom's side, had grown up Orthodox and become Reformed in his life. He was the bar mitzvah tutor of the synagogue, owned a liquor store during the day, never laid tefillin after he moved to San Francisco in the whatever time it was, around through World War II. And when I said to him that I got into rabbinical school, I wanted to become a rabbi, and I was wearing a yarmulke. I think I told him I wanted to be a rabbi. I hadn't gotten into rabbinical school yet because I was just in university. He told me to take it off. And I said, "Papa, why?" And he said, it's too dangerous. You shouldn't be so out there publicly about your Judaism. I appreciate that you're proud of it and all, but you should keep it, shah still and quiet. And I thought he was wrong. And I said, the Holocaust is over. We have Israel today. The anti-Semites wear white hoods and burn crosses, and I don't see any of them in San Francisco. We're fine. And I look back on that now, and I was naive. And he had seen the cycles that we are now experiencing again. And he was telling me something that I couldn't even believe was possible. Just like the possibility of the United States invading Canada. Couldn't believe it was possible. And I'm not sure that there was evidence, has ever been historical evidence for what might happen. But between that, but it was a golden age. I proudly was involved in my Jewish youth group. Our family, did public Jewish things. We marched for the JNF as we marched for trees and for water all over the place. Never thought once about, or never thought twice about my Jewish identity being challenged at all. In fact, Jews were out there on the front lines fighting for other people's identity. I remember the whole Skokie thing and the ACLU and Jewish groups saying, we should fight for their right to hate us in terms of freedom of speech. That's how comfortable we felt. And that, as Foer writes, that bubble has burst. And maybe that was in fact a bubble, and this is more the norm. So he explores the resurgence of anti-Semitism for both the political right and the left, suggesting that these rising hostilities threaten to conclude an unprecedented era of safety and prosperity for Jewish Americans, and argues that this shift not only endangers the Jewish community, and this is an important piece, but also undermines the liberal order that we as Jews have significantly contributed to in establishing. Because of this rise in anti-Semitism, Jews have pulled back from the traditional role that we have played in many of the social justice circles that we have run in. And I'll think just about this congregation for a moment. We were out front on refugees during the height of the Syrian civil war and the Syrian refugee crisis. There is no way that I would go to our congregation right now and say, let's bring in Muslim immigrants. Let's bring in Muslim refugees. And I don't think you would want to hear that from me. It's not that there aren't still Muslim refugees that need to be saved from the horrors and savages of Syria and other places. But we wouldn't do that right now. So when Jews pull back from those kinds of things, or when we say we're not going to show up at climate justice things because they don't want Jews there, or they don't want Zionists there, they told us we could only march if we don't bring our flags at a pride parade. So we pull back from those places, and either those groups are diminished because of it, or they go along without our values influencing it. I don't know exactly what that's going to be, but it's not good for the Jews, and it's not good for the world. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory talks about how the world needs the Jews, that we are the alarm clock of history, that we are the conscience of society. And maybe that's what it means with chosenness, that we're there to say you're doing it wrong, although I like to say that as Jews we say there's a better way to do it. These are the laws, these are the ethics, these are the practices that we should follow. But when we pull back, the world doesn't get that voice anymore. or they certainly don't get it from us. So I think that that's part of the bad news, is that our withdrawal is impacting the rest of the world. Just a couple other things in the bad news category, and then I'll get to the good news stuff. So Yossi Klein Halevi, in one of the articles that I linked to, talked about how this event ended this post-Holocaust era, a period characterized by Jewish resilience. This is the Golden Age piece, different article, but Jewish resilience and optimism following the atrocities of World War II. And he suggested that the attack on October 7th shattered Israelis' confidence in their state's ability to protect them, and challenged the American Jewish community's sense of security and acceptance. How many times did you say to yourself, or did others say to you, you can always go to Israel, you'll be safe there? And then that sense of safety and security gets punctured and ruptured. And I've talked to Israelis. Ezra and I were there in April. I was there in December of 2023. The sense that the ground beneath their feet had just crumbled. That they could count on the IDF, and even if the IDF took hits, that the IDF would show up and would rescue them. But it took the better part of a day, and in some cases more than one day, for the IDF to show up into these places that were still under attack. You know, I was watching Israeli news on October 7th, I guess the morning here, October 7th there, and to hear these call-ins from people hiding in their safe rooms, and they were playing them on, on Khan and all the other Israeli news stations. You know, they're whispering because they're right outside the door, and you're like, how can this be happening in Israel, where there's an Israeli army, where there are resources, and it's not a big country. You can drive from end to end in 4 hours. If you're an Israeli, you can do it in 3.5. They drive so fast, and yet this was really happening. So that sense of vulnerability, which we thought would never happen again. That's the whole point, right? Never again. Part of that was because we have an army. So that has been a tremendous erosion of a sense of security. And we felt it here too, right? We've felt the vulnerability of our community. We've established, and this could be on the good news side of things, I'll come to it in a moment, but we've had to establish all sorts of new security infrastructure at tremendous expense. And I get phone calls all the time, and particularly during high volume events, about people who are not coming because it doesn't feel safe. And I think those calls would be much more if we weren't streaming things. But because they have the option of watching at home, they may not even call me because they're just going to watch. But so many people call. Before religious school starts every year, they want to know what our security procedures are, what to expect. And I see of us as this, we're not a little shul, but we're in, the corner of the Jewish world. I don't think we're on Hamas's radar. But I don't know that we're not on the radar of a few crazies in Vancouver who have been inspired by Hamas, or take your pick. So we've seen a global rise in anti-Semitism. I don't need to tell you that, but if you've traveled at all or you've seen things, what is happening here is happening there, particularly in Europe, in horrifying ways. And it's not just the news, that makes the headlines. It's not just those, incidents outside of soccer matches and stuff. Truthfully, it's happening quite frequently and in small ways on subway trains and in schools and in businesses and in union environments in particular. There's been a challenge to Jewish identity and solidarity. I will say on the negative side, I'll say in the good news in a minute, I get phone calls from time to time of people that say, I want to take my mezuzah off my door. Is there a blessing to say for taking your mezuzah off? By the way, when I was a student rabbi in Visalia, California, which is in the breadbasket of Central California, it was right before Pesach, and I was at the synagogue, and I got a phone. This is apropos of nothing, but it just reminds me now. I got a phone call from somebody that said, Rabbi, I know it's Passover, but I want to know, can I use matzah meal for fried shrimp?
What's the answer?
I said, yes. I said, first of all, I never had fried shrimp. I guess you can, but it's still not kosher for Passover. I've never forgotten that phone call. There's been challenges to Jewish identity and to solidarity. We have seen divisions, that have been created within Jewish communities. We've always, as I said before, we've always been divided over issues. That's the Jewish way. But now we have new lines of division, having to do with Israel's response, having to do with whether you can be Jewish and not Zionistic. What to do, I gave a sermon about this, what to do with non-Zionist Jews in our families and in our communities. Is there a place for them? And what does it say about us if there isn't? And there's been a whole reevaluation of Jewish life in the diaspora. Levy suggests that the attack prompted a reevaluation of Jewish life in the diaspora, with communities reassessing their safety and their role in broader society. And in Canada, where Jewish organizations have called for increased security measures and greater awareness of anti-Semitism, CIJA, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, reported that 82% of Canadian Jews felt less safe after October 7th. And that goes back to Jews not showing up for shul, or not sending their kids to Jewish schools, or not letting them wear outward signs of Jewish identity publicly. I'm going to come to that again in the good news section in just a moment. And of course, we have the issues on campus and the environment and the climate on campus. I mentioned already interfaith and intra-community relations. And then there's our representation in the media and in sort of the public perception of Jews. You know, on one level you say, if they're not talking about you, you don't matter. But never in my lifetime have they talked about Jews so much. And it's scary to be the center of attention and be a very small marginalized group, because we're not the center of attention for the things that we want to be the center of attention for. We're not the center of attention for our Nobel Prizes, for our medical advances, for our innovation, for our contributions in the philanthropic world. We're the center of attention because of what has happened to us. So Daryl Horn's People Love Dead Jews, right? So we're the center of attention because they talk about all the atrocities that have happened. And on one level, I'm glad that people are hearing, you know, these terrible things. On the other, it's like catnip for the anti-Semites and the Jew haters out there. You know, it becomes almost a playbook. Oh, look, I didn't know we could do that to Jews too. And these horrible, horrible things get that replayed that, you know, become in some ways sort of pornographic. I'm not comfortable with that always being shared. And at the same time, in Israel, Israeli media struggles with also, if you don't share it, then nobody knows the truth about what happened to those hostages and how they were treated. I don't do a tremendous amount of social media, but I certainly know enough about what's been going on in social media to know that the things that are getting put in circulation, the sophistication of the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish stuff that is out there, and the way that it is getting passed around amongst younger generations, 20s and 30s, and those younger than that in high schools, without any real good way to respond. It's not that we don't have our own social media influencers, but it's hard to overcome these algorithms that we probably took part in creating on a technological level. And so this environment where our teens who live so much online are seeing all of this negativity and not getting a counter-narrative, or a counter-narrative that is as quick as a TikTok video. Or they can come, as I just did, some of you might have seen on my Facebook post, I had a question and answer with the rabbi here on Sunday with our grade 11 and 12 students. And they asked fantastic questions, really great questions. You know, and even if I answered them in 3 to 5 minutes, it wasn't as quick or as salacious or as engaging as that 30-second YouTube that shows, you know, either the terrible things that IDF is doing or all horrible things about Jews or whatever the characterizations are. So our representation in the media is certainly part of the bad news. So now to the good news. Without attribution, I want to read you just one letter among many that I get all the time. Though my parents were raised Christian in communist Czechoslovakia, neither of them wanted a life like that for me. So I was not baptized, nor made to go to church. Instead, I was dedicated as a child of the universe to choose my own path. I am a deeply spiritual person, finding great connection and comfort in the natural world with the phases of the moon, the cycles of the yearly seasons, food, friends, family, and giving to others. Most keenly, I identify as following a druid's path, walking this world gently, doing right by all of God's, goddesses' creatures, and embodying joy and wonderment each day. When I was 13, my dad took me to the Old New Synagogue and the Old Jewish Cemetery in Prague, and my soul became tethered. I started learning about my dad's uncles, my stepdad, and their family histories. These incredible humans left a deeply personal impact on me as courageous, kind people dedicated to making the world a better place, in light of what the Shoah took from them. From there on, I read and watched countless memoirs, biographies, and films to educate myself. Since October 7th, I have dedicated myself to learning, albeit slowly, more about Judaism in order to be a better ally, to honor and support the Jewish community worldwide. Lately, I feel an acute need for connection and to bring ritual into my life for stability, community, and mental wellness. There is so much about Judaism that I learned online. There's much about Judaism I am learning online. Through groups and other channels, gems of wisdom parallel to how I have been connecting with the world so far. As you take it all in, all that I have shared, what are your thoughts? Are my feelings genuine, or a symptom of some misguided, wayward soul looking for connection? This was the letter from somebody who's now a conversion student in our congregation. And the CJN did an article about this. There have been many things reported of what we loosely call October 8th Jews. People that have come, I would say, out of the woodwork at a time when you would think they would run from Judaism. They're running towards Judaism. They're finding something in our people and in perhaps the way that our people is facing and confronting the horrors of the world today that is empowering, engaging, and fills an empty part in their soul. And this to me is the top line of the good news category. We're not a proselytizing religion, we know that well, but that doesn't mean that we don't benefit from good press. And for all of the negativity that's out there about Jews, some are seeing, well, in one, if these are people worthy of being persecuted by others, what are they being persecuted for? And do those values that they're being persecuted for actually align with my own? Some are hearing in what we say and how we comport ourselves a message that they're not hearing from others, a message of love and inclusion, of nuance and understanding. I mean, yes, we have our extremists that say terrible, horrible things, but most Jews disassociate themselves, either personally or publicly, from those most extreme positions. And try to come down somewhere in, we just want to live together and share this land in peace. I mean, that is far and away the vast majority of the Jewish world. And even if you leave Israel out from it, and I think that that's hard to do from Jewish identity, if not impossible, the way that Jews are being confronted with anti-Semitism and Jewish hate, and the way that Jews have responded, and Ezra's sitting here, the kinds of things that we say when we're doing interviews and on the media are not, they hate me, I'm going to hate them. But, at times we go too far to explain when we understand, where this hate comes from. It comes from, a lack of education or knowledge or ignorance. It comes from not having experienced what Judaism really is. It comes from social media and all of these things. But the message that Jews continue to bring to the world, I believe, is the one that we've always brought, which is one that is based upon our core values of loving the stranger, because we were once strangers in the land, of seeing the world through those empathic eyes. And in spite of the challenge, we continue to do that. And clearly, people are finding value in that. I've always felt that, I was born Jewish, I didn't get to choose it, but I tell my conversion students all the time that I'm jealous of them because they got to make a choice. And then if you put all of the religions as I've come to study them, and I don't mean to disparage any of them, but if you put them all on like a buffet line, I would pick Judaism every time. For its depth, for its ritual, for its community, and I honestly, just having gone through Shiva with my family, from my mother-in-law, blessed memory, I saw it firsthand. I talked about it Sunday night. The way that communities come out, the way that we deal with death. And here I mean on a personal level, but also on a national level, is a celebration of human life. It's a celebration of humanity. And it's intimate. It's very, very present tense, as opposed to sort of hiding it away and putting it off for a celebration of life 6 weeks from or 6 months from now, and not talking about it and not getting our hands dirty with grieving. When people are going through, when I have interfaith families and they're going through grief, and the non-Jew learns about Jewish mourning practices, that often is a precursor, again, to either a closer connection to the Jewish community or full-on conversion to Judaism. Same thing with bar and bat mitzvah. And Jewish education in general. They see what we're about, and they're like, I want that. I need that for me. I'm not finding that elsewhere. So part of the good news is that for all the focus on Judaism, some people are actually seeing for the first time what we've been doing for a long time. So increased participation, we've seen it here in our synagogue. We haven't changed a whole lot of what we're doing. And our services are becoming more and more full, and people are sticking around more and more. There's 70, some of you that signed up for this program tonight. I'm sure the men's club always gets 70 people to their programs, but in spite of the fact that I was speaking, you still got 70 people. You're seeing more Jews in services, more involvement in Hillel and Chabad and other Jewish campus groups. I was just actually with our son, Levi, at Western University. We were on a college tour. We went to the Chabad. The Chabad rabbis count eyeballs, not people. So the Chabad rabbi said that he had 200 people every Friday night, so he had 100. But I did go to a class while we were there. It was on a Tuesday night, and he was teaching a Talmud class, more or less. And there were 26 or 25 kids, university students, sitting around a table. And this was the second section of that class. He teaches the same class for another group of 25 kids on the Wednesday night. I don't know, Rabbi Bregman, did you get 25 kids to Talmud study at Hillel twice a week? I don't think so. You know, the Bronfman the Bronfman Foundation, remember this 20 years ago, 15 years ago, wanted to start teaching Talmud at Columbia. Maybe it was NYU, either one, same kind of thing. And they decided that the best way to do it was to pay the students to come. They would pay you $500 to study Talmud. If you did the whole class, you got $500 at the end, because such was the value of teaching Talmud or Jewish values to university-age students. They thought that was a good use of money. And if you've got unlimited money, sure, why not? But here, in all places in London, Ontario, 50 students show up just because the rabbi says, I'm going to have a Talmud class at a Chabad, and it was multi-gendered that were present for that course of study. We're finding innovative cultural expressions. Younger generations have reimagined tradition, Jewish practices to resonate in contemporary Jewish life. We're seeing hot Shabbat and all these Jewish dating things, and a real effort to bring Jews together and to create safe spaces for Jews that, honestly, during the bubble of Judaism, and the golden age of Judaism, and I met my wife on J-Day, and we like to think it was more cosmic than that, but I met Sharon on J-Day, but even back then, it was like, don't go on J-Day, you're only going to find Jews. Now, we're creating spaces so Jews can meet Jews because they feel safer, because they want that, because they want the commonality, and they want they want that sense of connection. They're not running away from it so much. We're also seeing, and this is where I say it's a sort of a joy and an oil, or a sweet and a sour. So we're seeing enhanced security measures, for sure. But part of that is a deeper engagement with our elected officials and our governments. They're putting money where their mouth should be. They're investing in our communities. They need to invest in our communities because our communities are not safe. But at the same time, it allows them to invest in our communities in ways that we didn't engage with them before. And that creates political capital. And that's important. It's a two-way street, and so when federal governments give $25 million to the Jay West campaign, or to security enhancements at synagogues, we have some obligations to show up for them as well. That's just how it works. But we see other parts of it too. So our bitachon volunteers in our community, this has brought out, this is our volunteer security group. You've seen them in their blue vests. This has brought people out that I would say were unaffiliated with the Jewish community before October 7th. Largely Israelis, or people that were non-religious, that had no reason to affiliate with the Jewish community except for maybe the JCC, but who now feel like they want to stand guard out front of a synagogue. By the way, we have non-Jews that call us all the time that want to do that as well. It makes me a little nervous. But I kind of get where they're coming from, and I still send them to Jewish Federation. Call this number. Here's Ezra's cell phone. So we are seeing that, and we created something here in our community, ACART, the Antisemitism in Israel Crisis Response Team, which I think now is a new name. But that also brought, and some of you were part of that, by the way, brought people together in these subcommittees of whether it was doctors or university professors or educators or lawyers. We have all these other groups that are now working together on these challenges, and they're confronting really horrible things. I mean, they're hearing the worst of stories about people being canceled doxxed or targeted in their workplaces and their student places and spaces. So, but what's the adage, with crisis comes opportunity? There has been an opportunity to engage people where synagogue didn't engage them before. This is the fight they wanted to have. We've actually taken skills that we were using in social justice work for others, and we're using them now in social justice work for ourselves. Right, so I go back to the verse from the Mishnah that I talked about during one of my high holiday sermons, right? Which is, if you're only for yourself, who will be for you? And if you're not for yourself, what am I? Right? So if I'm not for myself, what am I part? We're living that now, and that's important also because it's an important part of the balance. Too often, and I've shared this before, I would ask a bar mitzvah student, what does it mean to be Jewish? And they would say to be a good person. And to me, that was just a terrible answer. To be a good Jew would be a better answer. So now, how do you be a good Jew? But to be a good person requires me then to say, well, what does Judaism say about being a good person? And that really is how do you be a good Jew. We were very universalistic. I would say too universalistic that we kind of lost the plot. Now we're becoming more particularistic. We can't become so particularistic that we forget about the rest of the world, right? Al tifrosh min hatzibur, don't separate yourself from the community. But we do need to focus on our community also. And we're starting to do that now in very particular ways. We've seen a huge increase in Jewish philanthropy. Some have joked we've never raised as much money without killing so few chickens at dinners. We don't have to serve food. We just say we're raising money for Israel, and to your credit and to the credit of our community and beyond, pockets are opening up and resources are being allocated. People are pulling back their giving from some places outside the Jewish community and giving to Jewish communities, but new givers are coming in also, for whom this is their shlichut, this is their sacred purpose. They don't want to stand on the sidelines at this moment in Jewish history. That's happening. And then the other note I had here was Jewish bling. The Jewish stars, the Mogen David that I am seeing, are just getting bigger and bigger. It's like, used to be, is that a Jewish star? I can't tell. And now it's like, wow. And I can see that it's like a hood ornament from across the room. But whether it's ID tags, David's wearing one, others are wearing them, yellow ribbons, people that are wearing kippot out in public now, as sort of a middle finger to the rest of the world. I dare you. By the way, that's a privilege to be able to do that. It's a privilege that we did not enjoy before 1948. I've told this story before about the mezuzah in the door. You might remember, I get a lot of use out of it, but I went to hang a mezuzah, this is 20 plus years ago, in Los Angeles to do a mezuzah hanging, and in the door jamb, as I went to put the mezuzah up, I noticed that the piece of wood was loose. So I pulled it away because I didn't want to attach mezuzah so it was going to fall down, and behind that piece of wood, where a mezuzah normally would have been on the door jamb, was carved into the door jamb beneath it a mezuzah with a scroll inside of it. So however many years, 40 years before that, 50 years before that, the family that lived there felt they had to hide their Judaism. They knew the mezuzah was there, but nobody else would. And here I was, 50 years later, putting a mezuzah on the outside of the door because they felt it was safe that they could. And maybe they felt it was safe that they could because of Jewish political engagement, because of Jewish climbing up the ladder in society, the getting rid of the gentleman's agreement type of anti-Semitism perhaps, and because of Israel, and because we had an army now, and we had a homeland, and that gave Jews the confidence and the chutzpah to say, damn you if I'm going to hide. So we're hearing that, we're hearing Jewish chutzpah again, and I think Israel is helping us in that regard because we're seeing Israelis stand up and say, never again is now, and we're saying along with them. So those are my observations of the good and the bad. I guess I would just say in conclusion, and then to open up for questions and stuff like that, I would say this is a new golden age of Jewish identity. It's a different one. It's not like the Judaism of the 1930s and 40s. It's not a Judaism where we run and live in fear and in hiding in attics. But it's also not the carefree, sort of, grandpa, there's no anti-Semitism, I can wear my yarmulke whenever I want, don't worry about it, that I grew up with. It's a smarter Judaism. It's a more street smart Judaism. It's a more realistic Judaism, and I would say that it's a more Jewish Judaism. Because what I was seeing before, not just before October 7th, but maybe, in the early 2000s, was certainly within liberal and progressive Judaism, a Judaism that was divorced from Judaism. That was about, coming from the United States, was about Democratic Party platforms. Was about social justice is my Judaism. And social justice is a part of Judaism. But Torah is Judaism. And Jewish texts are Judaism. And our holidays and our people are Judaism. And social justice is a part of that, but it's not the whole Megillah. The Megillah is the Megillah. So I think this is a new age. And I would say, I don't know yet if it's golden, but it is, I think, a bright and shining light, a beacon that is drawing others in and is actually providing a light and a focus point for people that have been Jewish their whole lives that didn't quite know what it meant as we confront those questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Certainly open to questions. Unfortunately, we only have one mic, so someone would like to raise a hand, I'll give them the mic, and then I'll have to give it back to Rabbi.
Or I can just speak loudly.
Or you can speak loudly. But anyway, questions, please raise your hand. Yes, at the back there.
It's okay, John, I can speak.
Sean's got
a loud
voice
as
well. Yossi Klein Halevi talks a lot about the changes that have happened between Israeli Jewish and American or North American Jewish. The events of the last year and escalated by the last few months, has that changed in your view between the positives and negatives picture that you painted? Is there the sentiment that we're feeling in North America that maybe there's a shift that has some positive aspects? Is that mirrored in Israel the same way, or is it different?
So I would say that thank you for the question. The divisions that I see in Israel now, and I'm going again with you in May,
Yeah.
and again in July on a Hartman Fellowship now. The Israel that I saw in December of 2023 was a completely unified Israel. Unified in civil society, unified in its horror at how the government had dropped the ball, unified in its support for the IDF, and in its support for the families that had been displaced and those that had been wounded and certainly those that had been killed and taken hostage. What I saw in April was a fracturing of that, and I think that has become almost a rupture at this point. I'm not there on the ground right now. Ezra was just there. Maybe he could speak more to it, but I think that we see new fissures in Israeli society, not just along the left-right divide, but they are along those lines. But the question of a reoccupation of Gaza, a messianic vision of a greater Israel, a obligation to returning all Jews and returning the hostages safely and securely, a sense that the war has become a bit of a quagmire or futile, that they can't bomb their way into peace. And then, of course, the Haredi involvement in the IDF, the lack thereof, and the move from the minority government, which is in charge, to take this tyranny of the minority, if you would, and ram through changes, both public and those that we don't know much about, in the way that the laws and society are working. People are aware of that, but then they're being called out for being, unpatriotic, bad Zionists if they question the government. We hear it here too, in the midst of a war. We see it in our WhatsApp groups here in Vancouver. So that is just becoming a greater and greater divide. It's not good for the Jews. It's not that we haven't been here before, but never have the stakes, I think, been higher for Israel.
Other questions?
Bob?
The same sort of topic as Sean was asking about, but from the North American Jewish perspective. forever there have been divisions in the community about Israel and what to support, when you can criticize. And I think we're into probably just the beginning of something much more severe than that, because of some of the things you were just talking about, particularly what's going on in the West Bank and so forth. And I'm just wondering whether you have the sense of this is going to be a really, really difficult thing for many of us Jews to navigate.
I do. I think that there's tools now that are in the hands of those that are that want to make trouble, those that have an extreme view, left or right. They have tools now that can amplify that position and that voice in ways that before we would have you never would have heard about it. I mean, I'll give you a personal example. So I'm on this Jewish community WhatsApp group. There's like 800 people on it. I don't really pay much attention to it, but I get a notification if my name gets mentioned. And so when we've had groups here at the synagogue that are center and center left, New Israel Fund of Canada, when we had the Israeli singer that we had, Noah, Achinoam Nini. I got lit up on that. How could I have this person who's pro-BDS, she's not, who wants to give away Israel, she doesn't, who's this, that, and the next thing. And then I got lit up on the same group for different reasons when we had Polyev here. And those criticisms were not from people in that group who felt that I was giving a platform to somebody that was either using Israel as a wedge issue and doesn't really believe what he was saying, or on his positions on LGBTQ, and I spoke about that in front of him and in front of 900 people. But then also from the right wing on that group, I got criticized for not calling out the protesters that were in front of our synagogue that were protesting our synagogue. But I should have gone out and protested the protesters. And none of that would have ever raised anybody's, gotten to anybody's inbox if we didn't have inboxes and social media. So, they could have said that when I was growing up, in their parlor meetings, or, I don't know, sent a fax to somebody, written a postcard. But now it gets read by, thousands of people, and we have, some pretty sophisticated folks in our community who are using social media to specifically target myself, David Burson, others in our community, because our views don't align with theirs. And therefore there's McCarthyism that is going on. It works the other way too. And we certainly see that happening on campuses where there is a McCarthyism that is happening against people like Greg Gardner and other university professors that are being targeted for just teaching their classes. But they take a archaeology mission to Israel, and therefore they should be completely canceled and doxxed and all these kinds of things. So it's very, very dangerous, the tools, the weapons of mass destruction and distraction that people have at their disposal.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
I actually was thinking of a different angle. I was thinking about sitting around with close friends who, like me, are very Zionist, and are struggling not with being Zionist, but horrified about what's going on and trying to, regardless of what the other people are saying about it or using in ways that they are using it, it's awful. It's to be grappled with.
Yes. So I was having this.
I guess that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. So I was having this conversation with a member of our congregation today. The rabbis of the Talmud, they lived in their version of ivory towers, right? They did a lot of great debating over very hypothetical things that very rarely actually got tried in the real world. The question with Judaism has always been, what happens when you're actually a country and you need to try to govern by Jewish values? Can you govern by Jewish values? I took a class in my undergraduate called Jewish Political Theory. And I was critical of the class because I said, this just doesn't work. You've got an omnipotent God and Moses, that know everything and have power to do everything, but that's not the reality on the ground. So, I used this example with the person I was talking with earlier today. There's a famous Talmudic debate about if two men are in a desert and they have only one canteen of water between them and only enough for one to survive, who gets to drink the water? Do you know the answer? The one who's holding the canteen. Okay, that sounds rational and fair and logical, except for the guy who's not holding the canteen might be holding a gun or a knife. So all of your wonderful values and ideological, high in the sky ideals are great until they meet the reality of the fact that there's a sworn enemy that wants to destroy you, that is a kilometer away from your communities. And what do you do about that? And this is the challenge. Can you be Jewish? Can you govern Jewishly? Or does that have to get set aside for the reality of how you govern in our world today? Right? I don't have a good answer to that. I think that I think the fact that we struggle with it is the most important thing. What I worry about, and I hear it in the Netanyahu government, to be quite frankly, is they're not struggling with it. They're not saying, gosh, how do we do this? Even for all that we say about the IDF and their door knocking and their flyers and all those kinds of things, we're hearing more and more about what we knew was coming, a fundamentalist messianic rise in the ranks of the IDF, for whom, this is a bit of sport. And that is terrifying. I think extremism in either direction is perhaps the most dangerous thing, as Jews know, that you can experience. It has to be in balance. Is that a better answer to your question? More of an answer?
Yes. I wanted to ask if you know anything about, I don't know who has supposedly written either an essay, maybe it was a book, but I think it was an essay, about antisemitism in the White House, like currently. And the person that was telling me about this, a friend that was telling me about it, mentioned that, she said, well, last time Trump was president, we heard all about Jared and, whatever, and we haven't heard anything about Jared recently. I just was wondering, what do you know about the prevailing attitude? I mean, certainly, Trump is talking a good line about supporting Israel and whatever, but I'm wondering what you know.
So at the risk of answering your question by not answering exactly your question, but I'm trying to, I don't know anything specific about the White House. Thank God I'm not on their speed dial, and they're not on mine. But I'll take a moment to comment on Colombia for a second and what just happened. I don't forget the guy's name, but the Palestinian activist that they just revoked his green card and other things. You're all familiar with this? You've seen it in the news? This is really dangerous for Jews and for the world. And when I talk about how when Jews pull back from civil society and our social justice stuff, the world suffers. We were always out there on the front lines using the right of free speech to say the unpopular thing. That is often what Jews do. So because of free speech, we marched at Selma. Because of free speech, we were freedom riders. Because of free speech, we defended Nazis in Skopje to march with their Nazi flags in a Jewish neighborhood, and on and on and on. If we sit back and say, oh, but this affects us, now this is good for us, we didn't like this guy, he was a rabble-rouser doing all this, when they haven't, as far as I've read, they actually hasn't been charged with any particular crime other than saying things that are unpopular. He wasn't involved in vandalism. He didn't do something that broke the law, but we say nothing about it, or we allow this government to use us as this beard for their larger goal, which is to get rid of Muslims or to get rid of immigrants in society, and to come down in a very hard and harsh way, in a very authoritarian way, on free speech and the freedom of assembly. It may be good for us in the short run because they're targeting us now. It is not good for the Jews, and it is not good for the world in the long run. And we have always been the ones that have said, don't do this, because this has happened to us. So we have to check ourselves and not just sitting quietly and saying, oh, it's okay now because this is good for us, that we've been beat up on campuses. And believe me, I want there to be a crackdown on these folks on campus, but crackdown on the right ones. Crackdown on the ones that are breaking the windows, that are setting the fires, that are shooting the bullets into schools, that are stopping students from going into their classes. Not the ones that are standing on a bullhorn saying river to the sea. I hate river to the sea, but he has a right to say it.
Any further questions?
I'll ask my voice is loud enough. So Rabbi Dan, I'm just kind of curious talking about, okay, thank you. I'm just curious.
I'm not sure it's on to him. Go ahead.
Is it on now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm curious about how October 7th has impacted your relationship with the other clergy in the greater Vancouver area and around the world. So,
Jewish clergy or non-Jewish clergy?
oh, you already told us about the non-Jewish clergy.
Okay.
So the Jewish clergy. You know, I use warm and
Warmer. Yeah, warmer.
Yeah,
Warmer.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's
We
been,
haven't spoken
look, we
about
all,
that.
so in December, with some assistance from the Jewish Federation and some 2 outside funders, the entire Rav, or at least representatives of the entire Rav, 7 of us, 9 of us, 9 of us, I think, 8, I don't know. It was a lot. We all went to Israel together. Now, we're a group that works together really well anyways, and that's a credit to Rabbi Bregman, who created the Rav, and a credit to this community that has nurtured it and sustained it, and to Federation and to others. But we have collaborated at every single opportunity. We have confided in each other. You know, it's probably the same in your workplaces. There are things that rabbis can say to each other that we would never want you to hear, but that we need to get off our chest or to say. And that has been really wonderful, and I think that there is a fellowship that has been created there. I feel that also in the many, many opportunities that have been created since October 7th for rabbis and other Jewish professionals to come together, to collaborate together, to work together on issues and things. I just was chosen for a Hartman Fellowship, a different one than Rabbi Brown, for courageous communal leadership, a specific Canadian fellowship. And that didn't exist before October 7th. I don't know what the source of funding was, but I am pretty sure there was some very wealthy or wealthy donors that said, I want to get courageous Canadian Jewish leaders together to help them navigate these next days and to have them do it together. And that wasn't a priority before that, or else it would have existed. So I think that some very good things, again, right, the good news and the bad news, some very, very good things are coming out of this. And I, for one, know that I could not say what I say and do what I do to the extent that it's useful or helpful in any way without Rabbi Brown, Cantor Cohen, and all of my colleagues in this community and beyond, who I feel an alignment with and have my back. We don't always agree on things, but we're all working in the trenches. And I'll just say one other thing, because I have a sabbatical starting in 2 weeks and like 6 days. No counting. Coming from COVID to this, like we barely got to breathe. And this hit right after Simchat Torah, or on Simchat Torah, when most rabbis and cantors plan to breathe. Right? That the month after the high holidays is called Cheshvan, but its true name is Mar Cheshvan, the bitter month of Cheshvan, because it has no holidays in it. Every rabbi or Jewish professional I know considers it to be the sweetest month. And so it hit us, and it hasn't stopped. And with my involvement with ACART and stuff, it has been, I feel like I've been drafted into an army and into war. And that's been the footing. Like, this is not what I became a rabbi to do. I was not an expert on anti-Semitism before October 7th. I was not even as expert on Israel, or knowledgeable about Israel as I certainly have become before October 7th. And now this is what I do. I became a rabbi to teach values, to sit with you at bedsides and bar mitzvahs and gravesides, and not do this. But this is what's required, and so this is what I need to do. And we all need to do.
You mind if I? So you were talking about the sort of resurgence of people being proud of their Judaism and wearing, identifying. I'm not one of them. But I wonder what you think would be the most useful thing that John Q. Jew could do right now to further our cause and fight against anti-Semitism, practically.
Talk to your non-Jewish friends. Invite them to your Seder. One of the most impactful thing you can do is show them what Judaism is. And that doesn't have to be invite them to your Seder and solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Invite them to your Seder and argue over why they sat in Bnei Barak for as long as they did. Or, how many plagues there really were if you use the counting from the Haggadah or whatever. Invite them to your Shabbos dinner. And don't talk about Israel politics. Talk about why we bless our kids. Talk about the weekly Torah portion. Show them what Judaism is. We don't proselytize, but we should promote. We should publicize. We don't proselytize, but we should publicize. And thank God we are safe enough to do that. When I first arrived here in Vancouver, there was an effort going on within the Muslim community calling itself, it was something like Islam Unraveled or something like that. And they were going around trying to explain what Islam was. They had come out of 9/11, and Islamophobia was still very, very present. And they wanted to explain who they were to the communities. And they came here to the synagogue. And it wasn't an easy conversation. They came and spoke to our seniors. Some of you might have been there. We challenged them on Israel. They didn't have great answers. But I brought a confirmation class to the mosque, and we had a dialogue with them, and there was a great exchange. It served almost nothing, if nothing, and worse, after October 7th. Those friendships that I had, and Rabbi Bregman and I have been dealing with this, disappeared and became worse than disappearing. They flipped on us. We thought we had allies, and instead we had enemies. In some cases, not at all, or just silence. But I knew a lot more about Islam after they came around and showed things. And I have an appreciation for their faith that they may not have for mine. And so we need to do more of that. And you can do it at home with your Seder, which is coming up, or your Shabbos, which is just a few days away.
Can you talk about standing together?
No.
Okay.
I'm not sure. There's so many names in different groups. Is that one of the?
The one that's it's been put forward recently. The authors of The Wall Between spoke.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with it. I've heard of it, but I couldn't speak about it.
Could you repeat what she said?
She asked me to speak about a group called Standing Together,
Oh.
and I'm not well versed in their platform or their practices. Yes.
I'm just wondering, for people in the room who aren't familiar, if we could just have a shout out to Daphna and what she's been doing every week.
Yes. So Daphna Kedem, who's a volunteer in our community, and again, another example of somebody who was not engaged with the affiliated Jewish community before October 7th. Well, that's not true. She was engaged with the affiliated Jewish community pre-October 7th because of the unacceptable group. But before the judicial revolution that was proposed in Israel, I think Daphna was not particularly engaged or involved with anything in the sort of the established Jewish community. But as an Israeli living in Vancouver, she, and it's not for me to speak for her, but I know her well, she took up that cause to try to do what she could to raise awareness about the judicial coup, as she frames it, that was happening in Israel, and how we needed to do something here to call that out, whether it was to get the Canadian government to do something or just to educate our community about what was happening so that we didn't tune it out. And then October 7th hits, and just like happened in Israel, where all of those that were involved in the unacceptable group quickly switched over to becoming the civil society infrastructure that supported the hostages and the bereaved and the displaced families, with the hamals, the gathering centers where they distributed aid and supplies that the government should have done. Daphna began our weekly rallies and has been doing them ever since. And as an example of the divide that's existing now in our community, just like we're seeing in Israel, we have two rallies now. There's the march with the flags across the bridge, and then there's the march then there's the rally, which I guess is now at City Hall and was at the Art Gallery. Those used to be one group, but now they won't stand with each other because of their various reasons for the agendas they think the other has. And that's tremendously sad and not tremendously unique in the history of our people. But Daphna has been truly a warrior for this cause. I think she'd be the first to admit that she's not the easiest person to work with. But you gotta have chutzpah like that in order to be a warrior. So, credit to her for that and for her resilience and her perseverance.
I'd like to, as the rabbi in the community who does not have Sundays dedicated to funerals, unveilings, weddings, and everything else, it's become my second synagogue. At 1 o'clock, at 2 o'clock to be, now at City Hall. And we'll get anywhere. Last week was pretty sparse. We'll have 50 to 200, whatever. What's incredible with Daphna, and she isn't easy to deal with, but who cares, is that she always has non-Jews speaking as well.
Yeah.
Some we like, I have to tell you, the African-American evangelicals are the best. Just in terms of, and how they quote Torah, and they're not there to convert us, but you can feel the spirit. But I really encourage you to come down to City Hall. It's right at 12th and Camden, where we are, and to spend an hour or 45 minutes, and the speeches, some are great, some are not so great, it doesn't really matter. You know, and I take a look at the weather outside, and sometimes the worse the weather, the more compelled I am, because all I have to do is think about the hostages.
Mm-hmm.
They don't get a chance to decide, oh, today I'll be a hostage or tomorrow I won't be a hostage, because the weather isn't good. We have the freedom to be there. And I have to say, to stand outside our city hall at the present time with a council and a mayor who has been there for us. And by the way, there's an election coming up, and there's a great individual running, and I'm going to plug him, Jamie Stein, who's running for council and shows up, and has been showing up before he was running, and so on. But it's a community, and these are people that I have never seen, many of them, before in my 45 years here. But now we're a family. So consider coming out on Sundays.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good.
So if I can just say one thing in closing, and that's a plug. So as I mentioned, I'm leading a mission to Israel to bear witness and to rebuild for our congregation, but for the broader community as well. We are going to Israel May 11th to the 16th or 17th? 16th? 16th. But you can extend after, you can come early before, and our tour group will help you with it. It's as affordable as we could make it, which is $3,000 US plus your airfare. And if any of what I have said to you is compelling you to want to learn more or to engage more or to do more, this would be a tremendous way to do it. We still have room on our trip. We've got about 25 people signed up as it is. But I would love to be with you in Israel and to see it through your eyes and to show you what I see through mine as well. So if that's something that you might consider, there's information on our website. I hope you'll join us. And I'll just say again, as a last thing, I think that while this may not be a golden age, it is an incredible time to be Jewish. For all the reasons that pressure and intensity create diamonds, the pressure that we are under now as a Jewish community, the intensity of what it means to be a Jew today is creating Jews. Not only out of people that weren't Jewish, like the letter that I got, it's creating Jews out of people that are Jewish but didn't know really what it meant to them. And that is not something that I have always been able to do in my 25 years as a rabbi. And so, again, crisis and opportunity. There is an opportunity for us here in a way to reinvigorate and re-engage with all the generations of the Jewish community so that we develop the leadership and the vision and the commitment that we're going to need for the next 50 years. Thank you all. Thank you.
Rabbi Dan, on behalf of the Men's Club and all of us gathered here, not everyone's a member of the Men's Club, but they're always very welcome.
I wonder why.
Thank you so much. A comprehensive assessment, your view of it. It would be interesting to find out from people how much, if there was anything that actually surprised them. But you surprised me in one way. When you said towards the end, and you gave a slight modification just now, that it's a new golden age. I'm not certain. I don't find that I can agree with you at the moment, but I very much hope you are right, because certainly we had lived in a golden age, and I have felt for some time that has abated and normal service has been resumed towards the Jews, and that's very worrying. Really, we're here as a sense of community, as you said at the beginning, and it takes me back to the 1967 war for a sense of community. My sister was at university in Manchester when the war broke out, and my sister hadn't had a strong connection to the Jewish community anyway. We both were sent off to Sunday Hebrew school, but she never actually got into the Hebrew school. She got there and she disappeared somewhere else. But the '67 war broke out, and she came down from Manchester to London, which was our home, to be with family and to be with community. And I think that's what we are here as well. And I thank you so much for your leadership and the erudite way you're able to express our concerns and our values.
Thanks.
Please come and talk to us again.
I will.
We need to have a shout out about your daughter, a bat mitzvah of this congregation, who is the chief of staff of Hebrew Union College in New York City, an assistant to the president. So you should clap to you.
Talk about a thankless job.
Not my sister, my daughter.
Your
Yeah, he
daughter.
said
My
dog.
daughter.
He said dog.
I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you for that. I will pass on the acknowledgement. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Reminder, Purim, if you haven't signed up yet, you can still come to the service, but the meal and the stuff is full. We have over 300 people signed up for Thursday night. Service is this weekend. It's the Kleiner Bat Mitzvah, the first of many. Sarah Kleiner's being called to Torah. Constantine is right there. He's the man that his hand is cramping from all the checks he has to write. Nobody writes checks anyway, just tap. So come out for those things as well. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.